Campaign Pulse. Decoding campaigns. Defining power.
Hello and welcome to Campaign Pulse. I'm your host. My name is Dimpho Lecheu. Now, when people think about political campaigns, they usually think about speeches and rallies and debates. But behind every campaign is something that a lot of us don't see, something less visible: money. Without it, it's difficult to reach voters. Yet, the very thing that makes campaigning possible can also become one of campaigning's greatest risks. Where does campaign money come from? At what point does fundraising become influence? And when does influence ultimately become corruption? Well, joining me today is Christine Aochamus, the Secretary General of Namibia's Independent Patriots of Change, now the country's official opposition following the 2024 general election. Christine, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Campaign Pulse.
Thank you, Dimpho.
I'm so glad I got your surname right.
Yes, you did.
Before the episode, we were having a brief history lesson about the history of Aochamus.
Sure.
I think before we get into the conversation, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you found yourself in the interesting world of politics?
Yeah, it certainly is interesting because it's not something I planned. I never thought I would be in politics. I thought politics was meant for crooks and for people who were determined to destroy the country, and I thought politicians are evil people and shouldn't be on the face of the earth. Long story short, I came into politics purely, should I call it luck, because it was not planned. I had a friend who I went to university with who was part of the founding members who were crafting the formation of the IPC, who then invited me to come and assist them with the organization of the founding convention of the IPC. That was about a month before the actual formation of the IPC. But he didn't tell me it was a convention for a political party. He invited me to help him organize a conference. Now, the room we are in is in the same passage as the practice, the dental practice of Dr. Itula. So I walk out and I follow this guy. We get to the Scottish Health Center, that's what it's called, into the practice, and he asks me, "Who are you?" I tell him my name, he asks my background, I give him a brief, and then he just starts talking to me about democracy and the law and whose responsibility is what and why Namibians need to exercise their rights, and he starts giving me an induction into this political formation that he's planning to launch. Then he gives me the party constitution. He says, "Go and read it, give me feedback, I'll call you in 3 days." And then by the time I came out, because that conversation took 3.5 hours, I'll skip the rest because we need to be mindful of time. He then calls me a few days later as promised. "Did you read it?" I said, "Yes, I read it. Anything you want to point out or flag?" I say to him, "Well, in principle, we've covered the bases. We probably just need to deal with repetitions and, terminology and stuff like that, cosmetic changes." Then he says to me, "Yeah, I know, I wrote it." I'm like, this guy is rude, Anyway, so on the day of the convention, before that, he actually calls me back a second time and he says, "You seem very intelligent. I would have loved for you to be in the leadership of the IPC, but unfortunately, we've already advanced the proposed leadership to the Electoral Commission of Namibia." And I say to him, "Well, I didn't come here for any politics. I've just come to assist my brother with organizing this thing. I'll see it through. But that's about it." And there I was in my pink tracksuit.
Now officially a
politician. So that's how I got to
Thanks for sharing us.
IPC.
That's such a beautiful story. And you mentioned so many interesting things that I hope we'll have time to touch on.
Sure.
I think, you talked about an independent candidate running against the incumbent government, which is something that we don't see a lot. Sure. And I think that comes into the conversation about money as well, because to run against an established political party requires resources, right?
Absolutely.
But you also mentioned song and the role of music and song in political formations and the role that it played during that conference, which is something we touch on in one of our other conversations. But if we have time and space, I really hope that we get to speak about it. But let's get into the uncomfortable question. Can a genuinely good candidate with very little resources still win a political campaign?
Absolutely. But they've got to work really hard.
Yeah.
And they've got to do what candidates with money don't do. Because money opens a number of doors. It makes things comfortable. Democracy is expensive. Every campaign requires fuel for vehicles to move. It requires money to print flyers and billboards. That requires money. But that money and the resources require another resource, which is human capital. If you want to win against a candidate that is well-resourced, which was our experience in 2020, is for you to have a campaign that is completely different from how the money campaign is being run. We relied completely on volunteers. We had human bodies that were going door to door, village to village, house to house, knocking on actual doors to say, look, we need change in our country. We've seen how the incumbent has run this country for the last 30 years. We've got an opportunity to try something different.
And what is the conversation that you're having with those volunteers, Christine? Because I imagine to convince people to leave whatever it is that they're doing in the middle of their day to go door to door to campaign for a political formation that they've never seen in action requires a lot of tact and a lot of strategy. So what are some of the conversations that you're having with volunteers, with professional members of your staff who maybe are not even getting paid because the party is still in its building phase?
Yes. I mean, the IPC, maybe before I get to the conversation with the volunteers, the transition from the independent candidacy of our president already mobilized young people to follow this vision. And when he, at the end of the campaign in 2019, did not win the presidency, the question then arose. You stood as an independent candidate in the political party that he belonged to, which was the incumbent at the time. Many people had to choose between a sitting president and supporting an independent candidate. Now, we know how ruthless politics is. If you have changed your loyalty to support somebody else, there's no longer room for you in the party. So many of those people felt we have now been exposed.
Sure.
And it will be difficult for us to be comfortable in the party. So a lot of young people actually came out to participate for the first time, and they too felt that they needed a political home. And that transitioned into the formation of the IPC. Now, since then, since 2019, many young people who followed the independent presidential candidate actually transitioned into members of the IPC and already knew and were convicted that this is the candidate we would like to support, this is the political party we would like to support, and we're volunteers. It's interesting because the question you ask is, what's the conversation you have? The short answer is there was no conversation to convince people to do this. There was a natural drive for young people and for professionals to just volunteer. It was incredible. You would find people had painted their houses in the party colors with the emblem. You'll find people have branded their own vehicle. You'll find people were printing their own T-shirts. Our party colors is white. And you would find people with green T-shirts with the party logo on it, a yellow T-shirt, a blue T-shirt, whatever they could get, they were branding. And they would go door to door and they would go village to village using their own resources to support the party. But we knew that everybody in the country was ready for change and they were willing to give an alternative, an opportunity.
Sure. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that in order to win a political campaign, the candidate who isn't as well resourced as their opponent needs to do things differently.
Correct.
But I'm also hearing that they need to take advantage of an opportune moment, an opportune time, so that they don't have to try and convince people to get behind the cause. Because what you mentioned, human capital, right, the talent, is a very important part of driving campaigns. And you need to make sure that people are able to do the work because they want to, because they're driven to. So fast forward, you contest the elections. You're now in parliament, and you're no longer the startup political party that was contesting elections. You've grown in size as well. What are some of the challenges when it comes to resources in the political party that you faced in the building stages versus the challenges that you face now? And now that you may have more resource channels open, what are some of the considerations that you have to make when it comes to deciding how resources, donations, money that is fundraised is used to advance the work of the party?
So in our formation, the party purely relied on donations and voluntary services of its membership. It was very difficult to fundraise. Very, very difficult. I think because of previous political formations that were formed in the country before us, nothing really changed because they didn't get the block of votes we got to be able to affect change. So people were very hesitant, but the ruling party was also very ruthless. We would get people commit to say, we're going to support you in this or that. And they would just pull out at the last minute because the ruling party would somehow get to know about it. And I don't know what the fears were, but people would just withdraw and decide that they're not going to support us. I remember in 2024, we literally had to ask members to donate individually to their campaigns. If we had to have a leadership meeting to strategize, we would try and get resources to get transport for them to come to Windhoek, and then ask the leaders themselves if they can identify a family or a family member or a friend who can accommodate them, because there was no money to be able to do big things. But we could organize very well. And because our theme was white, I see, the countertops are white here. It makes things nice. It makes things look very niche and very clean. Our campaigns were always very nice because it was white. And that separated us from the loud colors that the ruling party had with all of their resources. Fast forward to 2024, we had to, of course, enter into several agreements with people who believed in our vision, people whom we formed partnerships with, lifelong friendships. And these people managed to introduce us to other people who were able to make things happen for us in terms of material, for example.
So networking and making use of those social, that social capital.
Yes, and somehow, people were able to say, this is a political party we can work with. And we got that support to get us through the election in 2024. After the elections, then the hard work actually began, because now everybody that was volunteering feels the party now has money, forgetting that the last 5 years, there were certain conversations that were had behind the scenes. There were certain arrangements that were made to make sure that we were able to participate in the elections. And that was a liability we now needed to honor, to make sure that we keep those relationships with the people that have helped us to come through. But what I must say to you is the financing from subsidy that we receive for the 20 seats in the National Assembly are strictly governed. The Electoral Act is very clear on how you can utilize the funds. You can't go willy-nilly with it, and you have to account for it. So much so that you need to publish your audited financial statements. You should have the information available on file for 5 years after the completion of your term in the National Assembly. And you also need to have access to the public once they pay the prescribed fee to the ECN to come and check your documentation on how the funds are being utilized. It's still extremely difficult because we are a political party that is rivaling the ruling party. For the first time, the ruling party does not have the 2/3 majority it used to enjoy since independence. There is a 3% difference between the seats of the ruling party and the collective seats of the opposition, which is 45 for the collective opposition compared to 51 of the ruling party. The voting majority in the National Assembly is 49 seats. That means if only 2 persons from the ruling party are absent and the opposition abstains, they can't, or 3 people are absent, they can't
pass legislation.
They can't take a decision. Mm-hmm. They don't meet the voting quorum. So for the first time, that there is that very thin margin between what the ruling party can do without the opposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk now about the increasing public pressure for political parties to disclose where their funding comes from. It is something that is happening across the world. There are laws on it. There's legislation on it. We saw it for the first time here in South Africa during 2024, where parties had to disclose where they were getting their money from, anything above the 15 million rand threshold. So it's something that is happening, and it's obviously affecting the way in which political parties are able to get their money and who parties are able to get their money from. So how do you manage that resource allocation, where money comes from, but then also the influence, subtle influence that often comes with it, where donors want to influence the direction as well as the policy objectives of the political party?
Well, I believe any political party has got its own values of what it is that it wants to attain for the people or for the electorate. And if you are a party that is principled, you would know exactly whose money to take and whose money not to take. The disclosure and the regulation around disclosure of political funding is, as you've said, governed by the Electoral Act in Namibia. It's similar to what South Africa has got. And in our case, I wish I had a story to share about a funder who says he has 20 million Namibian dollars for your campaign. In exchange, I would like for you to do A, B, C, and D. Unfortunately, I don't have a story like that, where we really had funders with influence with big monies come. Our story has really been that of grassroots. But we've also had opportunities to engage people who offered with expectations, and we turned away because they don't align with who we are. Number one, they don't align with our values. They don't align with our principles. We are a grassroots participatory democracy. Ours is very basic. We want to ensure that every Namibian has got access to basic needs: housing, water, infrastructure, access to health, access to education. That's what we want for our people in Namibia. We are not seeking to advance a particular policy for a group of elite or for investors, but we are looking to change how our country is governed so that our resources benefit the people of Namibia. That is the determining factor in how we identify whose money we would take and why we would make that decision.
Now, you speak about values, but there's also a data question.
Sure.
How much of your budget allocations are determined by instinct, and how much of them actually rely on data and you understanding what data says about where to spend your money in order to increase your supporter base, but also to be able to persuade voters.
True. So data for us is key. You cannot build a political party without a database. You've got to know where you've got support.
Yeah.
You need to know where to work. You need to know what number of volunteers you would require to get that job done. You need to know the resources in terms of logistics that you need to commit to that particular activity to ensure that you spend your money wisely, and money can only go as far. So data tells us where to work. We need people to do that work. For us, both are critical, because once you know your membership, you then are able to identify them on the voters roll. And if they are on the voters roll, you then have to make sure that they go out and actually vote. And once they've casted their votes, you would then know what your outcome is. And we've tested this in 2024. We've measured our results against our database, and they were almost 1-to-1 in terms of the number of members we had on our database in a particular area and the number of votes we got. And when we were doing a reflection, we were saying to our regional leaders, even if you were to go to court and say, I've been robbed, you would need to prove that in that locality, you had this number of voters whom you ferried to the polling station to cast their vote, and thus your votes do not correlate to your membership. Then you've got a case you can argue. But you cannot tell me you've got 20 members on your database who are on your voters roll, who've casted their votes, and you now have 15 votes, but you are saying you should have gotten 100. Data is important. It helps us make factual decisions.
Is there a point where money is not only used to campaign, but is used as a tool to start buying access? And is there such a thing as someone who is just too wealthy to campaign, to a point where it almost becomes dangerous for democracy?
If access is limited to people with resources to participate in political activity or in democratic activity, we've got a very big problem. We should never allow our democracy to get to a point where only a select few with money are able to participate. Then it's no longer democracy, it's something else. Money does enable access. You will find, I've seen it in religion too, where the leader of a church, a prophet, would say you pay an X amount to sit next to the prophet in church. So it does buy access. But that should not be our goal. Then we are defeating the principles of democracy. Every individual, the rights in the Constitution are accorded to citizens in our case. Every citizen in Namibia has got the right to participate in political activity, whether directly or through freely chosen representatives. But if we make it difficult that only people with resources participate in political activity, then it no longer serves the purpose.
For ordinary voters who are currently watching an election campaign, what would you say are some of the important red flags to watch out for so that they do not become unintending so that they do not become victims of vote buying from political parties?
Yeah, every political party has a political program. Many call it a manifesto, in which people really outline what it is they would do if they are elected into power. And we have seen that many political parties would advance a manifesto, but once they are in power, would then have a policy completely different from what they've promised because of influence and vote buying, and also influence on policy in terms of what they execute when they are in office. What people need to understand, if you're speaking to grassroots about vote buying, is to be alert. And the mistake that opposition political parties make is to go into a lull after the election and come back with a hype a week or two before elections and expect the electorate to take them serious. It's important that in as much as the ruling party or the incumbent is visible and engages with the electorate, because they use the state machinery, they run local government, they run regional government, they run national government, they use those resources to be relevant and visible throughout the election cycle.
Sure, which is a completely different conversation about the line between state resources and party resources for campaigning, especially for parties that occupy seats within governance.
Yes, true. So vote buying doesn't only happen, especially in our case, doesn't only happen in election year. It happens throughout because they use all of these opportunities and avenues. You've got Independence Day celebration, it becomes a rally of the ruling party. You've got Heroes Day celebration, it becomes the rally of the ruling party. You've got youth programs, whether it is a Day of the African Child, it becomes a rally because they use these avenues to advance their own campaigns. So I still believe mobilization has to be coupled with education. It has to be continuous. And whenever it happens, it needs to be highlighted so that it is in the psyche of the electorate that these are the strategies that are employed in trapping us in believing these people are doing something good for us. And in so doing, we unintentionally or unknowingly supporting the incumbents to stay in power because we have been made to feel comfortable for a day or two.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us and having this very difficult but necessary conversation with us.
Thank you for having me.
So money doesn't necessarily guarantee victory, and a lack of money doesn't automatically mean defeat. But funding influences almost every aspect of a political campaign, from the voters parties can reach to the message it can communicate and the people that it mobilizes. Understanding where campaign money comes from, how it is spent, and who benefits isn't just about campaign finance. It's about understanding how democracy itself works. A big thank you to Christine Aochamus for joining us, and thank you for watching this segment of Campaign Pulse. It's time for On the Pulse, where we keep our finger on the heartbeat of political campaigning around the world, tracking the latest developments, innovations, trends, and stories shaping elections. We start in South Africa, where the Political Campaigns Resource Hub has launched its Campaign Watch. It's training South Africans to observe and document how political campaigns are being fought, from the messages of parties and the issues that parties focus on to rallies, voter engagement, and campaign activity on the ground. So I went along to see what the training involves and caught up with PCRH researcher Decoding to explore what campaign watchers will be looking for, why this work matters, and what it could reveal about the way South Africa's next election takes shape. So in 2024, the world witnessed an unprecedented number of elections, yet the strategies, tactics, and innovations that shape political campaigns, both online and on the ground, often remain unknown and only known to those who are directly involved or sitting in the rooms where decisions are made. To help change that, the Political Campaigns Resource Hub has launched Campaign Watch, an initiative that deploys trained campaign watchers to observe political campaigns and document strategies and innovations, as well as to capture how voters are responding on the ground. Today, we're launching the Campaign Watch in Johannesburg, following the pilots in Zambia. And to tell us more, we're joined by Decoding from the PCRH. Go, thank you so much for joining us on the Pulse, on Campaign Pulse.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about what exactly is Campaign Watch and why is it important that we watch political campaigns?
Sure. So Political Campaign Watch is a pilot project by the Political Campaigns Resource Hub. And what we've done is we've noticed a huge gap in political campaigns, where political campaigns are not professionalized, they're not run by data, but they run by instinct, guesswork, and intuition. So what we've done is to try and professionalize the field of political campaigns is to deploy data-driven insights in terms of how we understand political campaigns. And to do that, we then thought of the project of Political Campaign Watch.
Sure.
We are then deploying 10 watches in South Africa to 4 provinces, the Western Cape, Gauteng, Eastern Cape, and KwaZulu-Natal, who will then be our watchers on the ground, showing us what's happening digitally on social media, as well as what's happening on the ground in terms of canvassing, rallies, posters, etc., and all other various mediums that political parties use to campaign.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, this is a pilot program, but you first piloted in Zambia, and now today we're launching in South Africa. What are some of the contrasts that you're expecting to see out of the two countries, or maybe even some similarities?
Sure. I mean, I think both countries are quite vibrant politically. Both countries have a really vibrant youth demographic. We saw in the previous election in Zambia where the youth vote really did a lot to change the trajectory of the country. And so we're really expecting to see quite a lot of vibrant politics where the kind of tactics that are used on social media as well really bring along the youth vote. But I think in the Zambian context, where there's the sort of two strongholds, the UPND and the Tonze Alliance, whereas in South Africa, coalition politics and local government are quite prominent, right? However, those coalition politics in and of themselves are unstable. And so we're really looking to see what are those differences where there's strongholds on this side in Zambia that we're able to witness, and the sort of context in and of itself and the contest is, while it's a rivalry between these two elements, you can sort of predict what might happen. Whereas in South Africa, in the local government element, there's unpredictable coalitions that might come up. There's unpredictable alliance between political parties that might come up. So there's those interesting factors as well that we'll be seeing. And yeah, I think in South Africa, it's going to be quite an interesting election. The local government election is sort of touted to be quite an unprecedented election as well. And so we're really looking forward to seeing innovative tools being used by political parties to campaign, where they're really trying to gain that missing voter to come along with them and head to the polls.
Speaking of the missing voter, because I know that it's a term that we use quite often in our space, but I think a lot of people might still be not fully understand what it means. Are we talking about someone who has never voted in their life? Are we talking about someone who can't vote for whatever reason? When we speak about the missing voter, who are we talking about, and why is this such an important demographic for us to look at?
Yeah, so I think it's all in the name, right? The missing voter is the voter that we're missing. It's the registered but not voting voter.
Sure.
It's the voter who's disengaged, who's disinterested in politics. It's the voter who may be registered, but they're not actually turning up to vote. It's the eligible voter who isn't actually registered to vote as well. So it's all of those different categories of people where we're losing them somehow within the fold and we're not speaking to them. And that's why I think this project is also so important. It's to understand, are the political campaigns that are running, modern political campaigns, are they speaking to that missing voter? Are they reaching that voter where they are? Are they speaking to their needs, to their desires, to the things that they care about? And are those things translating to campaign messaging, to campaign tactics?
Sure.
Those are really some of the things that we're hoping to see come out of the Campaign Watch.
Speaking of those things that are coming out of campaigns, what are some of the surprising things that have emerged so far in the Zambian campaign season?
The Zambian watch has been quite interesting. We've seen a lot of innovative AI tools as well. I mean, we know that, you know, with AI and social media, it's quite an exciting time right now with how young people especially are able to use social media. Exciting and scary, right? I mean, we saw a recent controversial AI singer, for example, in the context of South Africa.
Sure.
But in the Zambian election, or rather in the Zambian campaign period, we were able to see a campaign use AI in terms of making songs by AI. And so there's a lot of new and interesting ways that we're seeing music evolve as well. We already know that as a traditional tactic, political parties usually have rallies where they'll bring popular artists, and music will form a big part of how they appeal to the demographic that they're trying to appeal to. And so really the use of AI in music, so integrating the new, which is AI, with the traditional that we're used to in terms of the music, the songs, the beats, the dancing, and merging those two, I think has been quite an interesting thing that we saw in Zambia. And I think another big difference in the campaign tactics has been in Zambia with the sort of focus on traditional leaders and how political candidates really need to speak to traditional leaders in order to gain their constituents. And so I think the difference there, particularly in the South African context, is while there are those constituencies that you really need to speak to the traditional leaders to gain access to people, etc., and to reach your intended voter, there are a lot of other different ways where that shows up differently in those contexts. So in the urban areas, for example, in the Western Cape, where we won't see those kind of tactics emerging, and where it's unlikely to see those kind of tactics emerging. And so there's really so many different and interesting things that are emerging out of the two contexts.
Yeah, all of this information, where does it go? And how can people who want to access it, access it?
Yeah. So all of this information, we're hoping to have it visible in the form of research, insights that we as the PCRH are able to publish. I think if we go back to the fundamental reason why we exist and why this project exists as well, is to be able to provide data-driven insights on political campaigns. And so we foresee this information being able to be available in terms of articles, journals, etc., that we have in the pipeline. But fundamentally, people can access all of our work on our social media platforms as well as our website.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for this informative conversation. We absolutely cannot wait to see the work of Campaign Watch in South Africa, but also to keep sharing all of that rich data-driven information that's coming out of both the two countries.
Nice, thank you for having me.
Now today we're at Election House, home of the Independent Electoral Commission here in South Africa. We're here to talk about the missing voter. Who are they? Why do they matter? And how do we speak to them and make sure that once again we get them to engage and show up to the ballots? Now, to have this conversation, we're very privileged to be in conversation with the chairperson of the IEC in South Africa, Mr. Mosotho Miapia. Dr. Miapia, thank you so much for making time to speak to us.
Welcome home and good to be with you.
The missing voter is not one person, but there are two overlapping groups, right?
Yes.
The first one is the missing eligible voter.
Yes.
This is a South African who is of voting age, but is not at all on the voters' roll,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
This group has grown from 8.3 million in 2000 to about 17 million, 16.9 in 2026. And then we have the missing registered voter. Now, this is someone who is registered but does not turn out to vote. And this figure is sitting at about 11 million since 2011. Why do you think we have such a huge gap between registered voters and people who actually turn out? And what are some of the reasons we see eligible voters still not making it to the voters' roll?
There is a deficit in expectations and promises. Many of those voters are saying, we get excited when an election comes. We choose a candidate that has spoken to our desires. They get to office and they forget about what they said they will do for us.
Sure.
And yet we haven't forgotten about what we want from them. So that deficit plays a significant role. The second one, it's a democratic dividend expectation. They say, we thought that democracy would cure many of societal ills, unemployment, good roads, water, and so on and so forth. And they say, increasingly, we are getting disappointed.
Sure.
And so that expectation versus what they had is a big issue. The third is efficacy of their vote. There are those who believe that their vote does not matter.
Sure.
And I say this almost painfully, because you would know, and maybe you will say, no, you also don't know, and you hold a different view. We spend as a nation a significant amount of money as the commission, electoral commission, but political parties and candidates as well, trying to reach out and get people out to register and to vote and to try and interest them in getting to vote. But there are still people who say, I didn't know about this, or it's not for me, I'm not interested.
How would you say the missing voter becomes a threat to democracy, or when do they become a threat to democracy rather than just being a choice, a personal choice to stay away from the polls?
Interestingly, in this year's registration drive, for the first time, we have significantly increased the eligible voters on the roll. That must tell you that something has happened where a number of those have in fact decided we will register. We don't know about voting. We will see how it goes. I say so because, as I indicated to you earlier, when the Chief Electoral Officer gives statistics of registration, I estimate we should have exceeded, for the first time in this country's history, 29 million voters. In real terms, it means we have done extremely well, because in 2024, we had just over 27 million voters, under 28 million voters on the voters' roll, in spite of mortality, which stands on average at 34,000 people per month. We have a net increase of over 1 million.
Got you.
That tells you that we have done way better than people
expected.
Absolutely.
So the number of people who are being registered onto the voters' roll is increasing.
Yes.
Even though it remains to be seen whether those people are actually going to show up.
That is the biggest test.
Going to show up at the polls.
Yeah.
Given this increase and given those three major reasons that you gave at the beginning about why we see the missing voter continue to be a problem, is there anything that the Commission has done differently this year ahead of the registrations?
We have. You see, the Human Sciences Research Council study that we did serves a fundamental task of informing how we prepare for elections. You see, we don't simply go out and say there's going to be an election in 2 years. Let's assume there are going to be. We first want to understand what a typical voter expects.
Get a sense of the moods
Absolutely.
of the voter.
The mood, their demands, desires. And these are not things just for ourselves. We take the lead as a thought leadership institution, amongst others. We take the lead to say to political parties, civil society organizations, this is what the South African citizen is telling us about the upcoming election. They say, IEC, if they say so, IEC, you're inefficient, please, we don't want to wait at stations for more than an hour. They say, political parties, you're not giving us candidates we want, we're not going to vote. They say, civil society organizations, you have lost your path, and you're not looking after us. They say these things. And so we use that as a planning tool, to address the issues they raise. So we go to civil society and say, civil society, we will do better if you heard voters say these things. We tell political parties, you will do better if you did the following. And then we say to ourselves, here are the challenges we've got to overcome.
Mr. Myopa, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and having this discussion with the kind of honesty and just openness that I think it deserves. We surely look forward to the 4th of November, and we will be watching closely as all the different campaigns here on Campaign Pulse, where we decode campaigns and define power. Just a reminder that we're not done talking about the missing voter.
Yeah.
At the IPE 2027, which is happening next year in August, we're going to dive deeper into the issue of the missing voter. Who are they?
Yeah.
Why are they important?
Yeah.
Why are they
Yeah.
either a threat or an opportunity to our democracy? And how do we get them to come into the ring and begin exercising their democratic right to vote? That is at the International Political Expo 2027. We will share more details on our socials when we get closer to the time. You've been listening to Campaign Pulse, where we decode campaigns and define power. If there's one thing that today's stories reminded us, it's that great campaigns aren't defined by the size of a country, the size of a budget, or even the size of a political party. They're defined by me and you, people, and how well parties can understand them. From campaign strategy and digital messaging to grassroots mobilization and voter engagement, we'll continue to bring you the ideas, innovations, and lessons that are shaping political campaigns across Africa and the world. I'm Dimpolecheo. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time on Campaign Pulse, the podcast where we decode campaigns and define power.
Campaign Pulse. Decoding campaigns. Defining power.